Welcome back to JunkDrawer Studio. Today I'm going to show you how I made this spooky graveyard from start to finish. And wait, if you watched my Junktober series where I built this graveyard, don't click away yet. I have a little bit of information to tell you. Yes, I did previously release this build in a series of videos throughout the entire month of October this year. I released a video every single day. The playlist is linked down below, but I thought it would be fun to release one more video on the topic where I edited all the footage down into one digestible video where you can watch the process from start to finish. This includes an entirely fresh voiceover, new insights, slightly different footage. It is not just simply a supercut of episode 1 all the way to episode 31. We're trimming the fat. We're gonna highlight some more comments that I got throughout the series. So if you watch the series and you left a comment, maybe you'll be featured in this video. So yes, if you've already seen my Junktober series, I totally wouldn't blame you if you don't want to rewatch me do this again, but it is slightly new content and not just a string out of the exact Junktober series. And if you haven't watched my Junktober series, this episode is for you. We're gonna build this diorama from start to finish. If you do want a little bit more insights on any of the steps, the Junktober playlist with all 31 videos is linked in the description below. Let's get started. To kick off this project, I started with a concept sketch. I knew I wanted a mausoleum on the left, a tree in the middle, a broken path, and a couple other details. I grabbed that wooden board, some Sculptamold, and some XPS foam and started forming the landscape of the diorama. Now, a graveyard doesn't have to have hills and slopes, but I thought that would just simply make it more interesting. So I made these sort of banks with the XPS foam on the corners and put Sculptamold on the whole thing just to smooth it out and also at the same time sort of roughen up the middle section. I added some glue, some ballast, some slightly bigger rocks, again, just to add a little bit more natural variation. Here I used a little texture paste just to extend that rocky texture all the way to the edge of the base, and I love where I started with this. This next technique is one I'm definitely going to use in future projects. I took some egg carton and ripped them up into little pieces to make a cobblestone path. Of course, I had to make sure it was scale appropriate and therefore Colonel Mustard approved. And once I did that, I just laid all the bits of cobblestone egg carton. I was unsure if the texture was really gonna come through once I painted it, but spoiler alert, this ended up looking awesome. It was old-timey cobblestone, exactly what I wanted. I grabbed a little bit more and got to finishing this broken down path. I have it kind of dissipating towards the ends, just so it looks like this cemetery is really in disrepair. Next up was making the tombstones. Here I cut some 1/2-inch XPS foam, but it was still a lot too thick. So once I had all the basic chunks cut out, I went chunk by chunk and carved them in half with a very sharp snap blade. This was a little bit more scale appropriate. From there, I just carved each individual tombstone. This took a long time, but I love carving XPS foam. It's so satisfying. Just make sure you're aware that you will get XPS foam absolutely everywhere. So I carved a bunch of them and they were really looking cool. Some of them are broken, some of them are chipped. I wanted to add even more detail, so I carved some runes and some other engraved details into the tombstones. I also textured them up with some tinfoil and glued them into place. You can see in the top right corner, there's a little strip of cardboard. This was my guide I made to make sure that there was room for the fence once I glued in the gravestones. I didn't want them to be too close to the edge because I knew I wanted a big stony fence to go around the entire graveyard. Next up is making the mausoleum. I made this basic structure out of some foam board just to kind of get the shape and size across. I then thinly shaved some more XPS foam. This technique I had never done before. I think I kind of made it up. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the first person who did this, but I didn't get this from anybody. I just thought it would be useful to make thinner sheets so that I could make these kind of big flat stones. I cut some L-shaped ones for the corners, and here I am showing it off. If you're wondering why my lips are moving, well, it's because I did the narration live in video for the original Junktober series. So that's not the first time you're going to see me dubbing over myself talking. I added some more XPS details and the mausoleum was really coming together. The last thing I needed to do was add some texture, which I do with a flat carving tool. I just kind of wanted to soften the edges of the bricks. I also, rubbed tinfoil all over this to get that stony effect. Here I am gluing some tiny little citadel skulls just to add a little extra spooky detail to the mausoleum. I cut up some strips of cardboard with some jagged edges and glued it into place to create the shingles of the roof. Now, I'll be the first to admit they're very unevenly cut, but I think it adds to the charm. It kind of looks a little witchy. And again, I want this to look very like old school Salem kind of witch trials era graveyard, very like 16th century kind of vibe. I also added a door with some EVA foam. And I sculpted a little face out of some green stuff. I was gonna call it a gargoyle, but it's definitely not a gargoyle. It's pretty unique in its design. I just kind of went for it. And he's super goofy, but I really did come to love him. And by the way, the community named him Square Earl. So say hello to Square Earl. Yeah, he's very creepy and I love him. If you will allow me, I'm just going to quickly interrupt my video to mention a couple new ways on YouTube that you can support me. I am very new to the YouTube scene, and YouTube has introduced this new feature called hyping. I know, it's if I'm being honest, it's really silly. I think all of this whole algorithm nonsense is really silly, but it is a necessary evil if I want to kind of get my videos pushed out to other people, and I like to be really honest about that. I would like to supplement my income with YouTube. I would like to be able to make more higher quality videos for my audience. So really quick, how hyping works. If this video just came out within the last 7 days and it's from a creator like myself who has under 500,000 subscribers, so I mean, I don't want this to be true, but I'll probably be in that category for a long time, you can hype it. I don't know. Ultimately, what it means for me is it's gonna tell YouTube to push my videos out to other people. That way I can get more subscribers, more views, and make more videos for you. So take that with a grain of salt. The other feature that isn't necessarily new, but I just enabled it on my channel is super thanks. On the bottom of this video, there should be like a ... Now I'm talking about desktop. I think it's probably pretty similar on mobile. You can click the little ... There should be a little heart with a $sign that says thanks. There you can tip me, and it's called a super thanks. Times are tough out there, and I mean this genuinely. I do not want anyone to feel compelled to send me money, especially if you are struggling financially. Everyone who is watching this video is welcome to be here to watch my videos for free without ever donating. But as someone who would love to be able to make more videos and have this endeavor really supplement my income, I would be remiss not to mention the main way currently that you can support me financially, and that is watching videos and tipping if you want. I'm overjoyed to be creating free content on YouTube for you to watch, so I just had to mention it. But if you're young or otherwise don't have a lot of money, you do not have to spend it on me. Enjoy the rest of the video. Next up is the stone pillars that will make up the fence. These I wanted to be very ramshackled and dilapidated looking, so I just chopped up a bunch of irregular pieces of XPS foam, and as you can see in this time lapse, I glued them all together. I wasn't really sure how these were gonna come out, but once I had made a whole bunch, I was stoked with what these ended up looking like. They're all different, they're all unique. It took a lot of time, but I think the results are totally worth it. This next clip will absolutely live in JunkDrawer Studio history. Yeah, okay, I promise I won't show that clip in every single video, but it is still very funny to me, so I had to show it one more time. I took those textured stones and made this little center area that I'm gonna have the tree growing out of. Love how this came out. I also textured up the pillars off camera. And again, super spooky, loving these so much. I glued them in with a little bit of tacky glue and baking soda just to kind of act as like a ground texture. I wanted these to really look like they were embedded into the ground. Off camera, I added some more of those textured up stones to connect the big pillars, and here you can see I took some plastic cocktail skewers, which were absolutely perfect for wrought iron fencing. I bought them specifically for this, and stabbed them in, glued them with a little bit of foam safe super glue. This is probably my favorite part of the build, to be honest. I think this fence came out absolutely killer. Highly recommend getting some of these cocktail skewers if you like the effect of these. Here I'm gluing in a bunch of different sized bones, some human, some larger than life monster bones. Stick around to the end if you want to hear a little story on this sort of inspiration for those bones. Here I am making the tree for the middle. This technique is something I had never done before, but it came out so good. I just twisted a bunch of pipe cleaners, basically. If you want a better and fuller explanation, I highly suggest you watch the tree episode from the Junktober series. Again, the playlist is linked down below. But essentially, I just took a bunch of pipe cleaners and twisted them up until I had that monstrosity. I then covered it up in a ton of super glue, and I mean a ton. Like, I probably used like a dozen full-size glue sticks. It gets really messy. Be careful, take your time. I then took a soldering iron. This part is optional, but I really do think it adds a lot of character, and I carved in some of that bark texture. You could do this with the tip of the glue gun itself, but I found it a lot easier and more effective with the soldering iron. I glued this into place with a bunch of foam safe super glue. Then I took some more green stuff and carved some roots. I really wanted it to look like this tree has been here for a long time. It is unruly. It is growing out of its little container stone fence thing, and it is just taking over this cemetery. This was super effective. Once it's painted up, you cannot tell where the green stuff begins and where it ends. I took a few more bits of the same green stuff just to make it look like the roots were kind of snaking in and out of the ground throughout the entire cemetery, but concentrated mostly to the center where the tree is. I did a quick prime of Mod Podge, black paint, a little bit of water to seal everything in before adding color. This is the stage where everything stops being the materials that you made the diorama out of and starts becoming what it's supposed to be. I always get really excited during the priming phase. I started with some dark grays and browns and just did a very heavy dry brush on everything that, would be gray or brown, mostly the ground and all of the stonework. I added some lighter brown to the tree, not super worried about getting into all the crevices. It was actually pretty difficult to paint, but also I like when the dark primer shows through in the shadows. I added progressively lighter stony colors to all the stonework, like the centerpiece, all the stones in the fence and the gravestones. Eventually getting up to a pretty bright white because I wanted this to look like a dusty, stony, chalky kind of look. I painted all the bones a brighter beige, and I went around and painted every single cocktail skewer this dark sequiny black. I wanted this to look like wrought iron, and I think I achieved that. I needed to pop a color, so I went with this bright purple on the top of the mausoleum. One coat was a little thin, but once I added 2 or 3 coats, this really popped, and I was super excited with this color choice. I made sure to pick out all the small details like the skulls with some extra pops of color. I used a white, like an ivory type of white, a layer of contrast paint, and then another dry brush of that white. Here I am making the gate for the cemetery. I went back and forth on what materials to use. You can watch the full episode of this one in the playlist below, but what I ended up doing was using those same cocktail skewers and some fake bones. I thought that was a really cool touch to make that gate, and I'm really stoked with how that came out. I also made a cemetery sign for the top of the gate. Now, I'm just going to point it out right here and now. I spelled cemetery wrong. That A should be an E, but we are choosing, and by we I mean myself, is choosing to believe of the people who made this cemetery spelled it wrong, not me. I am just being faithful to the source material, which happens to be in my brain, but it's fine. I took a break from the cemetery at this point and made a bunch of candles. This technique is really easy. It was inspired by a very old Blackmagic craft video where Jeremy took some toothpicks, some hollow plastic tubes, in this case it's cheap Q-tips, a couple beads and some paint. And again, watch the full episode if you want to see the full process, but this couldn't be easier, and you can kind of batch and make a bunch of candles at once. I just painted them up white and then added a little bit of speckles of orange, yellow. I did eventually clean up the edges with white, as you see me doing here, so that kind of glowing effect was a little bit more subtle. And honestly, these couldn't be easier, and they look so awesome. I made a bunch of different sizes, some with some little silver beads on the bottom, and some just without anything on the bottom, just a pure candle. Next up was some experiments with foam clay. I had never used this clay before, but I thought it would be perfect to make some mushrooms. I carved some morel-looking style mushrooms that you can see me doing here. I also did some little clusters of mushrooms. I made some stems and some tiny little mushroom caps that I glued onto those stems. This material is really cool. It has some limitations, but it dries super flexible. It's really interesting. It's honestly perfect for mushrooms. Here are all of the little white mushrooms, and here I am adding some Vallejo Wasteland Brown paint. I couldn't believe how mushroomy this color was. I was originally going to use a few different colors, but I was obsessed with how this looked. So once the candles and the mushrooms were done, I took some super glue and glued them in to really build the scene, adding a little bit of washes just to really marry those candles in. These mushrooms were so cute. Now I will say the mushrooms and the candles are a little big for 28 or 35 millimeter scale, but I'm choosing to believe that they are just really, really big mushrooms and candles in this world, rather than them being too big for this world. They're just really big, and you'll have to take my word for it. Also, who cares about scale? I think these look rad. Finally, we're on to the phase of adding grass. This really brightened everything up. I did like the kind of dreary color palette I had going, but it did need a pop of green. I added some foam flocking first, and now here I am adding a little bit of static grass to the edges where I think the grass would be a little bit more unkempt. So I got a lot of really good tips about the static grass, so thank you to everybody who watched. I did struggle with it a lot in this episode. At Summoning Matters left a super useful and helpful comment. I really appreciate all the tips and tricks that I've been getting from everybody. What I really gleaned from this comment is the part about laying down the glue and letting it dry for a bit. The really, really tacky glue helps the glue stand up. So if you didn't know that, now you do. And at Tabletop Thoughts, agreed with that. Just apply the tacky glue and give it a couple minutes to dry. I definitely did not do that, so I'm definitely going to try that next time. Elfbait3774 said, as somebody who has thrown a lot of advice your way, I'm happy to hear it's appreciated and not annoying. If you're giving me advice about something I'm doing in good faith, I can take it. I like it. I went to art school. Crit happens, as they say. I'll let you know if it's too much, but if you're doing it in good faith, I think I can pretty assuredly say that it is welcome. At Mr. White Pants, that's pants with a Z, they pointed out that I don't need a specific wire and that a sewing pin or like a T-pin would be useful to extend the applicator tip. So thank you, Mr. White Pants, for that tip. This next clip is from an episode where I was going to make these crosses to fill the graveyard, but I quickly realized just the crosses was a little boring. So to go with them, I also made these spikes with some skulls looking like they were impaled on the spikes. I know it's a little violent, but this cemetery is supposed to be kind of creepy, kind of otherworldly, and like a big mystery. No one knows what's going on in this cemetery, so although this is slightly violent detail for a cemetery, I have to admit I do think it's kind of cool and gnarly. So I made those spikes, a couple of the crosses, and glued them into place. I paint them after I glue them into place, which you'll see in a moment. But I like these. I think they're a cool little corner detail that you might not notice right away because they're not all over the cemetery. They're just in this one corner. Oh yeah, this weird thing happened with the super glue too, and I do actually have some insights here. I talked about it in this video. I talked about it in a later Junktober video. But I had gotten a lot of comments throughout the process. So with the combination of these lovely people who commented and also some of my own cursory Googling, it does appear that it was the paint that I had put on the cross that created the super glue bloom. Essentially, CA glue can react in that way when there is moisture. So let everything dry before using your super glue. So anyway, I painted them up. I did kind of a similar formula to what I did the other bones in the cemetery, and I thought these looked really rad in the end. Next up was a big swing, and I had some regrets throughout the process, but I do end up coming to like this little guy. Essentially, I'm sculpting a face into the tree with some green stuff. We went through a journey here. It did kind of start to look like just a face that had gotten stung by a bee, but in the end, I think I pulled it off, especially once I added paint after the green stuff cured. I have to applaud myself for matching the color so well, and after dry brushing, it blends right in, and I think it's just a fun little spooky detail. Finally, it was time to flock the tree. I grabbed these dead vines that I bought from a craft store. I kind of just wanted to use them because they're really crumbly and kind of hard to use. So I'm like, let me just get these out of the way. I think they actually would look really good. And also I just want to use them up. So I put some tacky glue all over the tree and just painstakingly glued all the little bits of dead leaves into the tree. I think I could have pulled this off a little bit better. I'd say I give myself like an 85 to 87 score out of 100 on how much I like that tree, but it worked. You'll see the final results in a moment. Here I am cutting little lengths of rope, super gluing the ends together and teasing apart the non-glued ends. This is a tip I got from Haunts Wargaming, and I made these little bushes. I dipped the tree rope thingies into some matte Mod Podge and water and just let them dry for like a day, and they ended up really hard and looking exactly like bushes. I truly could not have been happier with how those came out. I took this cool flock that I had that had these little kind of spindly bits of fibers and glued them to the top. I really locked it into place with some more spray tack, added a little bit more flocking on top just to vary up the color. And again, I've already said it, but I love how these came out. I used some toothpicks to really pin them into place along with some tacky glue. These were not fully necessary, but I like going that one extra step than is necessary in crafts like this because I often surprise myself and think, oh, I never would have done that otherwise unless I had pushed myself. That's one of those things. This coconut chip reptile bedding is also one of those things. I didn't need to add this, but I wanted to. I wanted to add some more roots and some really gnarly parts of this cemetery. I felt like it looked overgrown, but it didn't quite look distressed enough. You can hear more about my thought process in the full episode where I did this. I believe it is the swampy episode. But essentially, I ended up gluing bits of this coconut fiber. I cover it with flocking as well, which you'll see right here. And I think it was super successful. I had a lot of doubts, but it ended up looking like tilled earth, like these graves had been kind of dug up over the years. And I don't know, it's a really spooky and mysterious detail, I think, to a cemetery. So I love it. I added some flock to the mausoleum and the face in the tree, just to add a little bit of extra mossy detail. Now it's time for some rust. I love adding rust. It's just such an easy way to add distress and weathering to your dioramas and terrain. This is literally not a fancy product that I'm using here. It's just some rusty colored paint that I splotched on all the wrought iron with a fraggly paintbrush. It's just so simple and yet so effective. I always love adding rust. Next, I took some Vallejo Galvanic Corrosion, which does have, I think, a special effect to it, but really it's just a super matte, lighter orangey paint. And look at those results. This could not be easier. Yes, the Galvanic Corrosion paint is a little fancier than the first paint I used, but it's really not that special. Same with this. This is some Vallejo verdigris or green rust. I forget what it's called off the top of my head. I sloshed that all over this kind of brass cemetery sign. Here it is, not fully dry, but you can kind of see the effect it gives. I love this stuff. It is kind of a special effect paint, but you can achieve it with thinned down turquoise paint as well. I added a wash to the top of the mausoleum. This just added a nice, gritty, dirty look to it. You can kind of see a side by side. The right side I did the wash, the left side I hadn't yet. Speaking of washes, I took that gnarly brush again that I used for the rust and splotched some Athonian camo shade from Citadel. I'm not a big fan of Citadel paints, but this is one of my favorite shades that they have. It just adds this nice, grimy, algae green, and I think it looks really cool on old stonework. Just adds a lot of nice dimension. I added that throughout the stonework across the whole piece. Here we have another prop break where I took a break from the diorama and made some more props. This time I'm making some lanterns with some earring backs and some very basic craft beads. That is literally the only two things that these are made out of. I considered a few others, but I honestly think this achieved exactly the type of look I was going for. I glued on these tiny little metal rings as well so that I could hang them on these hooks that I made, which is literally just some wooden sticks, some super glue, some string. That's it. I painted the lanterns very simple, black prime, some orange and red paint, some yellow paint. Yes, this is sort of supposed to be OSL, but I'm not trying to do anything fancy here. This is just a tiny little detail, and I like how these looked. Here they are in the graveyard with those posts painted up. They're a little gnarly looking, but I think that's perfect for the vibe I'm going for. I also found that they helped get the scale right. Something about them hanging on the hooks looked really nice. I scattered them about throughout as well. Next up, I had to paint some birds and a couple other minis that I had. I had an owl, I have these ravens, and I have this gravedigger. This is the main character in this story of the diorama. I could not wait to paint him up. I busted out my airbrush and did a black prime on all of the models. My airbrushing footage is not great, so this is pretty much all you're going to get. I did a heavy white dry brush off camera and busted out my Army Painter speed paints. My approach to mini painting is speed paint first and then add some more highlights with some more opaque paints, highlights, details. I guess you could call this the slap chop method, but I can't remember off the top of my head if you do highlighting in the slap chop method. So it's kind of like a bastardized slap chop. But I love it. It's sketchy, it's loose. I'm not trying to win any competitions, but I think this yields pretty good results for pretty minimal time and effort. The face is the only thing I don't really like. It's a little muddy, but I think I pulled it off in the end. I painted the birds in the graveyard because I thought that would just be easier. I gave the owl a kind of snowy white speed paint, and then I took our raven friend here, glued him onto a tombstone, and took a medium gray speed paint to give him a quick pop of color as well. It didn't really matter if I got his face right, because you will barely see it in this diorama anyway. The birds are also massive, but we're also going to chalk that up to the otherworldly side of this cemetery, and not that I bought the wrong size minis. Here I am slathering on a mix of foam flocking and some tacky glue. I think maybe a little bit of water as well. You just want it to be like a paste consistency, and you can slap it anywhere you need to cover mistakes, anywhere you want moss to be growing. The glue and water completely dry, and it ends up drying into this kind of hard, dark green, or whatever color flocking you use, moss. To further that kind of mossy look, I added some craft lichen. You can get this at the floral department in a craft store. This stuff makes awesome moss. I mean, it is literally moss, I'm pretty sure. And it works really well to add those final little details of greenery throughout the piece. Speaking of final details of greenery, I also glued in a bunch of tufts of grass throughout on the cemetery ground, and particularly sticking out of some stone parts. Okay, so for these next couple clips, There was an episode in my original series where I did a few tests to create spider webs with Uhu glue. You're going to see the process in a second, but just keep in mind that there is much more content in that video. Link to the playlist in the description below. I didn't include all the experiments in this edit because it didn't feel necessary for this particular edit. Same goes for the section after the spider webs, which is the fall leaves. I think that was a really fun episode, but again, I did not include any of my experimentation. Essentially, I blitzed up a bunch of different materials and tested it out to make my own custom leaf mix. Check out that video if you want to see all of the experimentation. Uhu glue is definitely hard to pull off. It's difficult. You can kind of see me struggling in this footage. I know it's like so unsatisfying to watch, but it is cool. I got some comments after putting out the original video that gave me a lot of good tips. Some people saying to coat it in a varnish afterwards. This is a good tip. I think this is so fragile. If this was more of a scatter train rather than a diorama, it would break for sure. Okay, so yeah, the leaves. I took a coffee grinder, a bunch of different materials that you see me holding up to camera here. I did a bunch of testing on all of these materials to create the best fall leaf mixture. Most of them were fails, and yet somehow I did end up with this beautiful fall leaf mixture that you see here. I couldn't be happier with how this came out, truly. I added some spray tack to all different parts of this diorama and sprinkled these leaves everywhere. They're so realistic. They look really nice, like leaf debris. I wish I had more of the mix. I'm gonna have to definitely make some more of this when I run out because I think it looks perfect. One more thing about the fall leaves. Several people asked why I didn't just blitz up real fall leaves. Yeah, I could have done that. I've always been really hesitant to use organic, like biological material because I worry about bacteria growth. I understand with like sticks and stuff, you can dry them out in your oven at a really low temp. I'm curious if anyone has tried that with leaves. I don't know. Has anyone experienced using dried fall leaves for leaf debris and leaf litter in a diorama and experienced what that looks like, you know, a year after? Like, could it potentially promote bacteria or mold growth? Because that's what I would be worried about. Maybe there is a way for me to fully dry them out if I let them get super dry. So I would love to try that out. I've kind of missed my window this year, but next year I'm sure I'm going to give that a shot because all these comments are correct. That would yield absolutely stunning results. And now we're on to the final steps of this graveyard diorama. I painted the rim black with black 3.0, which is a very dark and very matte black paint. And finally, I gave it a little signature. Rather than putting my name or JunkDrawer Studio, I wrote Junktober 25 because remember, this is part of a series that I did in the month of October. If you want to watch the full series and get way more insights into all of this process, click through to the playlist below. And that is going to do it. I'm going to plug my Junktober series one last time before I show you the final reveal. Yes, you just sat and watched this 40 minute video, but I would encourage you to check out the playlist below where I went into detail on every single step. I just did the math and there's like over 5 hours of content in that playlist. So just something to consider. Thank you so much for watching. This has been a really fun process. And if you're watching this when it just released and you happen to live in the United States like myself, I hope you had a happy Thanksgiving and have a safe and healthy long weekend. If you liked this video and you like what I'm trying to do here, please consider subscribing, hype, super thanks, share, do all the things. I probably missed some of them. And come back here in a week or two and I should have a new video coming out. It's a really good one. You're not gonna wanna miss it. Thanks for watching. The groundskeeper had worked there for years, decades. How long had it been? He found himself wondering with increased frequency. He was tired, the days rapidly fading into night before he'd had a chance to finish all of his work. Hell, he couldn't remember the last time he had completed every single item on the list. The daily to-do list that he had been tasked with all those years ago. The list that he was told must be done. It hadn't always been like this. As a younger man, he'd complete the work and still have time to grab a pint at the local pub. Those days were merely a distant memory now. Faded, like the names on the gravestones he tried and failed to keep clean. It was once but a quaint cemetery, a small plot of freshly clipped grass, dimly lit oil lamps, and the occasional owl perched atop the gnarled tree that grew through the center. Unremarkable, in truth. The townsfolk had started to notice the changes. At first, it was easy enough to dismiss these changes away. The unkempt grass, the wild moss and ivy creeping up the side of the mausoleum, the rickety fence. Lately, however, it was different somehow. One day, a young girl and her mother spotted a crow that was thrice bigger than any they'd seen before. There were whispers of a face appearing in that old contorted tree. A group of neighborhood kids snuck in one night and swore they found bones bigger than an elephant's. No one believed them, of course, but they would soon. As the groundskeeper hung his hat for the night, exhausted, he glanced worriedly at his incomplete list. He knew he could not keep these things at bay for much longer.